This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Well, it's really fun to be here. I've been having a great time visiting with Trevor and getting to know Ashland. I've fallen totally in love with it, as I guess you all did also. And I've been pretty amazed by what seems to go on in this room from week to week. And I'm honored to be here to share with you some of the research that I've been doing over the last 30 years. So thanks for coming to listen. It makes it a lot more fun to share it when somebody's interested in hearing about it. So it can be slanted several ways, the information that I'm going to be presenting to you. So if I were going to slant it more toward the humanistic side or more toward the scientific side, who would want it more toward the scientific side? Okay, and who would want it more toward the humanistic side? Okay. It's actually a lot more scientific than most groups that I talk to. And what I'm going to be trying to do a lot is to bridge the two and really show that there's no difference between the two. The science of living a full life is no different from any other science. And also for this audience, I'm delighted to be able to be a little more freely metaphysical than I can with some other audiences. In my experience, everything's metaphysical, as far as I can tell. If you look at who you are, an obvious level of who you are is your body. But then if you look into your body, we're told that it's made up of these trillions of cells, and the cells are made up of zillions of atoms, and the atoms are molecules, and the molecules are made up of zillions of atoms. The atoms, they tell us, are made up of 99.9% empty space. And what is the rest? As far as I can tell, the rest is just vortexes in the space that we call electrons or protons or neutrons or quarks or whatever. We name them different things. As far as I can tell, it's just vortexes, and I'll be talking about that. And the space is not empty, as far as I can tell. The research is showing more and more that it's absolutely full of infinite energy at every point, and they're infinite points. So I'll be going into the implications of that. But if we follow that, then we go inside ourselves, and if even the protons and electrons are only vortexes in an infinite sea of energy, then there's no such thing as us. It's useful to regard ourselves as a thing so that we don't walk out in front of things called buses and stuff. And yet, if we get caught in the illusion that we're actually a thing, then we miss so much. We miss the metaphysical connection, because if there are no things, then everything's metaphysical. So what we call physical, I think, is just a certain vibrational range on the electromagnetic frequency. So all of a sudden, everything's just this dancing sea of energy. So we're all at home in there because there's actually no separation between you and me and the person sitting next to you and the paintings, and especially this painting here, I've been noticing about. So to bridge the the metaphysical and the physical isn't actually all that big a stretch if you realize that there are no things. So if there are no things, then you probably noticed that you've been here, even though every cell in your body is replaced basically every 7 years. You've been here the whole time, at least during this lifetime. So what is this thing called your body, and who are you then? And I want to suggest that what we call a body is just a complexity of patterns of whirling energy that is cohered by this thing we call our consciousness, and then give a name to our particular unique aspect of it. But if everything is just these whirling vortexes of energy, then I think it's really useful to look and see what's the nature of the patterning of that energy. And that's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to basically talk about two things. The two things is I'm going to talk about the fundamental patterning of life energy, and then I'm going to talk about what I've discovered about how to be in harmony with the fundamental pattern of life energy. I had a vision when I was 14 years old that I was somehow a pattern of energy between this vast thing called the solar system. I was having an introduction to physics at school then, And I realized that there was this little nucleus, and they said all these electrons whipping around, and it dawned on me one day that looked a lot like a solar system. So I mentioned that to my physics teacher, who was the best teacher I ever had in school, and rather than saying, well, duh, he said, God, what an amazing idea. Keep going on that, and let me know what you find out. So I'm still going on that. And I'm going to let you know what I found out. Because it's actually gotten really exciting. That's why I'm going around speaking about it now. So I'm going to talk about the fundamental patterning and how to be in harmony with that. And I'm going to basically get in 3 phases. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal path of discovery, what motivated me and what I found. And then I'm going to talk about the research that it led to of a scientific nature. And then finally the applications for daily life, interpersonal relationships, social change, living a full life that the implications seem to empower. So how many of you have seen a talk here or looked at the video by a friend and colleague of mine named Nassim Haramein? Okay, a few of you. There'll be some overlap with that. Any of those of you who haven't seen his work, I strongly recommend it. I'll be referring to it a little bit tonight. He's truly one of the great visionaries on our planet today. And he's, in fact, since he was here, I think he was here about 9 months ago, he's completed 2 physics papers which are completing Einstein's work. He had a very strong vision of where Einstein was wrong in his field equations. He's been working on it for the last 9 months. It turns out it looks like he's right. He's been working with a team of physicists who are doing the math for him. And he actually found the documentation of when the scientists were working on this particular aspect of the field equations. And they didn't know how to do the math, so they fudged it. And he intuited that and found it and has corrected it. And the paper has not been published yet. I just got a copy of it a week ago. But very great work, and I highly recommend you take a look at that. Anyway, so I'm titling this With One Breath, and I'm writing a book with the same working title. And what I'm referring to there is that we are all part of this one breath. And that on the other end of the spectrum, in our daily lives, when we get thrown off balance, one of my goals, and I've been involved a lot in conflict resolution from Aikido to communication to brainwave biofeedback and other levels, and my goal is always, when I've noticed that I'm off, is to be able to restore myself to my own center and balance with life energy in one breath. So that's another meaning of with one breath. So I'm going to go into some of those levels tonight. The breakthrough for me, because I grew up like a lot of you, see in the audience, with duck and cover. You know, we were jumping under our desks to protect ourselves from nuclear bombs. And something in me told me that wasn't going to get it done. And then, you know, through the challenge of the Vietnam War and the ones that have come out, and the whole nuclear situation, I definitely got the feeling that the generation prior to me did not have the answer of the way out for human beings. So I really set out on a quest to find out how can a human being be fully powerful and fully gentle at the same time. Because I felt if I could do that, it would feel good. And if everybody could do that, we might actually make it as a species on a healthy planet. So the first breakthrough for me was the discovery, for me, of the Path of Aikido. How many people in here are familiar somewhat with Aikido? Oh, wow, great. Well, you've got one of the great Aikido teachers that I know of here in Ashland, in Michael Friedel. And for me, when I was 23, I had done some karate and tai chi and some other things looking for this path and had quit. I couldn't find it. I couldn't commit my spirit 100% to any of those paths because karate, I found, wasn't a path that I could use on my children, or with my partner, or with the people that I work with, or even with my own emotions and so forth. When I went to my first Aikido class, I interacted with the teacher and found myself being effortlessly lowered to the ground, completely controlled in a gentle fashion. And he's got a big smile on his face. And I realized, I think this is what I'm looking for. And it turned out to be. And I trained in that for the next 15 years. And a lot of what I'll be talking about is then what are the principles of Aikido, and then how do we apply it where the conflicts really take place, which in my experience are in your body, in your emotions, in your mind, and in your communication with other people. As far as I can tell, those are the only places where stress hits. So if you can actually get some level of mastery on all 4 levels, What would life be like if energy were just passing through in a centered, balanced way? So one of the things that I noticed, remember since that vision when I was 14, that I was somehow this pattern between a solar system and an atom, one of the things that I noticed about Aikido is that there were certain energy principles. The first energy principle, if I had more time, I would actually have you experience all this, but it sounds like a lot of you probably have already. There are 4 basic energy principles in Aikido. The first is centering. And if your attention is up in your head or down in your feet or whatever, you're fairly easy to push over. If you have your attention in the center of your being, center of your body, it's not some surgically removable thing, but it's just the balance point in the center, just below your navel, in the center of your body. If you have your attention there, then you're much more stable, less of a pushover in life. The second principle is what they call weight underside or dynamic relaxation. If you're tight like this, actually let me do one quick demonstration. Can I borrow just the two of you for a second? If you put your hands on like this, make it kind of a butterfly on either side of me, come over next to me. Yeah, stand right next to me and open it up, there you go, and put that under my arm. And get real close to me, and I want you to lift me with your legs. I'm going to be real uptight, lift. So they can lift me when I'm tight. But if I allow all my weight to sink down through the soles of my feet and just be centered and allow the energy to flow, then go ahead and lift. It just grounds you to be centered and relaxed. Okay, thank you. So there's a sense of relaxing into the flow of energy between space and the center of the earth. It's just alignment. Dynamic relaxation, they call it in the Western world. In the Eastern world, they call it weight underside. Like if you have a bucket of water with sand in it, and you just let it sit for a while, all the sand sinks to the underside. That's the feeling of dynamic relaxation. It's not this, but it's balancing your levity, your up force, with the gravity, the down force. Third principle is extending ki, or allowing energy to flow through you, because you can be centered and grounded, but so is a rock. And a rock's not getting a whole lot done of the type of things that you'd like to get done in the world. So then there's this whole thing of allowing that energy to pass through you and then sending it out into the world. So as we do that, if one visualizes that the energy is passing through infinitely, you become very relaxed and very strong. Whereas if you just picture yourself like a 2x4 with the energy stopping here, you'll have a certain amount of muscle tension, but it's always breakable. It's like a dry twig versus a green one that still has the life flowing through it. So those are the 3 basic Aikido principles. Then the fourth one is how to take that centered energy and just blend it in harmony with everyone else's energetic system. So when I saw those energy principles, they made a lot of sense to me, and it started working in other aspects of my life. And I noticed that my own energy field, and some of the people in Aikido talk about this, had this dynamic to it where the energy rose up through my body, out the top, extended back down around and through the soles of my feet. This is a painting by a visionary artist named Alex Gray where he envisioned that same energetic field. This is a painting by an Aikido master named Mitsugi Saotome, one of the most advanced Aikidoists in the world, and an artist as well. And this is his depiction of this sort of donut of energy around our bodies, where you can see the grounding like the tree here, and the energy rising up and then coming back down around. In mathematics, they call that shape a torus, T-O-R-U-S. It's not an astrological thing, it's a topological thing. And this torus is going to be one of the main things that I want you to understand this evening. Because in my quest for the fundamental pattern of the universe, it looks like it's the torus. As far as I can tell, the torus is the fundamental energy pattern of the universe. There's some more complicated details to it, but basically, that's it. Go to the store and cut open any piece of fruit, and you're going to see basically this toroidal shape. A torus is a continuous surface with a hole in it. And an apple, a pear, even a banana and a watermelon and so forth. You'll see they all have somehow this toroidal dynamic, even though they're different shapes. Anybody know what that is? That's a red blood cell. When your bloodstream is very healthy, you've got trillions of these floating around independently, just rushing through your blood. They're healthy, vibrant toroidal energy fields. Very similar, this is the galactic nebula. And here you can begin to see the center. In any healthy torus, there's this sort of magic center in a healthy cell, which is also toroidal. There's a thing called a centrosome right at the center of the cell. And any of the little things that swim around in a cell under a microscope will always avoid the center until the cell dies. And then anything can swim through the center. But the life force connection seems to come through the center of the torus. When I first started looking for the fundamental pattern, I looked to a sun or an Earth or another planet, and they all seem to be spherical. But then I began to study a little deeper and realized that the spherical is a collection of matter embedded by an energy field. And this is a slice of the energy field, and the energy field is toroidal. In fact, it's double toroidal. It has a torus in here. They call them the Van Allen radiation belts, and then an outer torus, and then even a larger torus encompassing that. Then it gets a little distorted by the solar wind. They call this the magnetosphere of the Earth. This is a drawing from a Nobel Prize winner, Roger Penrose, a British physicist who has a whole toroidal theory of the shape, the geometry of the entire universe as toruses within toruses. One of my primary mentors, a visionary scientist and inventor, Arthur Young. I assume you have his books in the library here, The Reflexive Universe, The Evolution of Consciousness, and The Geometry of Meaning. He was also the inventor of the helicopter. He was the one who first taught me about the torus. And he said the torus is the only manner by which self-sustained motion can exist in a given medium. Whether we deal with the particle or the universe of particles, the topology or the surface shape is toroidal. So this is really key because what I'm interested in is sustainability. And as far as I can tell, the fundamental patterning of sustainability in the universe at every level is toroidal. So the better we understand this, the more efficient and efficacious our actions are going to be. He also went on to say the self in a toroidal universe can be both separate and connected with the rest of the universe. And this is sort of the beginning of where the science and the spirituality begin to merge. Here's an example. If you're on a flat surface, if you're point A, and there's a fence around you, called a body or your house or something like that, then you're separated from the rest of your environment. Whereas if you're point A over here, you're fully connected. There's a direct path if you go through the whole of the torus out to point B. So you're actually connected with every other point in the universe as long as you go through the hole in the torus. That'll have larger implications. And I think that whoever's doing these crop circles is telling us a lot about the geometries that I'll be showing you tonight, including many, many toroidal crop circles. Okay, the next, when I found Aikido and trained in it many years, I found, okay, this is a model that works. This is a modeling of how one can be, can one take care of oneself and at the same time take care of anyone else who's in their environment. And so I studied that for many years, and then I thought, okay, well, this works. This is what I was looking for. But then how would that work in terms of the other place? How in the real world? People aren't swinging swords and fists at my head most of the time. So what about the conflicts in my real life? So the next area that I looked into was emotions. And the Aikido energy awareness that I had gained helped tremendously. And the model that I ended up using, I taught communication and conflict resolution for many years. What I found, and the model has held up, and I've taught this to psychologists and psychiatrists and a lot of different folks, is that basically if we are this toroidal energy field, and if we're centered, the energy flows clearly. When something in our environment triggers what we call fear, then there's a tightening in your gut. It's gut level fear. And when you tighten in your gut, it's like squeezing on a balloon. It squeezes the energy out, squeezes it up behind wherever you're squeezing. So if you squeeze in your hara, or your vital center, as they call it in Japan, if you squeeze that, what happens is it stops the energy and squeezes extra energy up into your solar plexus. And you get overstimulated there. And I've asked hundreds of people in the workshops that I used to lead, where do you experience primarily fear, sadness, anger? And most people say they experience fear mostly in their belly. So what if fear was actually just the tightening of your vital center, such that you get a backup of extra energy in your gut? Overstimulation there, and humans want to give it a name so we can talk about it. So let's call that fear. And we're not exactly taught from grade school how to be masterful at allowing ourselves to be afraid. So we're usually taught, particularly the guys, it's not okay to be, don't let them see you be afraid. So we learn to shut down on that too. So what happens if you squeeze the energy there? Well, it pushes it up into here. And where I've noticed it comes out there is like what we call sadness. It's heartfelt sadness. Well, what if you weren't allowed to cry? You know, what if it wasn't a cool thing to just be free with your sadness, like it isn't for most people growing up? So if you squeezed on that one too, then it'd push it right up into here. And that's where it comes out. You put a lid on all of those vulnerable feelings as anger. You know, and you get it in the face and in the throat. And on the one hand, it's not a fun thing to feel or to be the subject of. On the other hand, it may be your body's last stand, trying to keep your emotion, the motion of your energy in your body. But if you don't know how to be angry without hurting someone or hurting yourself or something like that, well, then that's not going to work either. And you're not going to have to repress that. And if you block that, if you squeeze that one, where's it going to go? Right out of your body. Welcome to depression. You've depressed all of the energy through all those 4 levels, and now your energy body is not connected to your physical body, and that'll kill you. So how do you come back from that? Psychiatrists... Wait a minute. That power strip wasn't on, so my computer was about to give out. So psychiatrists for a long time would try to bring people from depression back into joy. And that would really piss people off. Because it's not a natural integration. It's much too fast a jump. What actually happens, and they finally, in the last 20, 30 years, they've found this now, that when you reconnect your energy body to your physical body, what you actually need to experience is the rage that was your last access to feelings. And when you can do that in a responsible way, it clears. And the good news is, it disappears. Bad news is, well, then all that sadness has a chance to come up. And then the good news is, if you allow yourself to feel that sadness, then that too disappears. It may take 30 seconds, it may take a year, depending on how big it is, how well you process it. But the key thing is here, just like in Aikido, instead of going against the emotion, if you go with it, then it disappears. If you go with an attack, the attack disappears because there's no conflict of energy. So if you go with the sadness, it disappears. Bad news is, guess what's coming next? The fear. So then the fear comes up, and if you can be masterful with the fear, allowing yourself to stay centered in the fear, feeling all that stimulation, just allowing it to be, blending with it, as in Aikido, then that disappears. And what happens is your energy goes back to the center. And in that moment, there's, in my observation, there's an incredible opportunity that we're not usually taught about, where when you clear your emotional body, you all of a sudden get to see your mind. And what's available, usually for a fleeting instant, is the thought pattern that triggered the contraction of all those contractive emotions in the first place. Something that is not true, some belief that you have that isn't in line with the way the universe works, like I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'm a schmuck, I'm a jerk, I'll never be able to amount to any, whatever it is, if it's not true, it'll trigger all that stuff. So when you clear it out, then you get to flip into, to see that subtler mental realm, and then you get an opportunity to do the same kind of work of recognizing, blending, and then leading, as in the physical of Aikido, as in the emotional process here with the mind. But first of all, this is the cycle of contractive emotions. As you get masterful with this, come back from apathy into anger, sadness, fear, and back into equilibrium, the really good news is as you begin to sustain that, then you move up into this whole other wave, whole other part of the wave. And that wave is now the energy is going to rise up your spine again. Except this time, instead of doing it through contraction, this time it's going to do it through expansion. So the first one is excitement. You begin to get engaged in life. Something is a turn on. There's a pull, a longing. And if you allow yourself to go with that, well, then it spreads up into your heart region, and we call it enthusiasm. It's entheos. You're in God now, because it's taken over the whole thing. And if you continue to go with that, it goes right up into bliss, which is just a word we give for that experience of full union with the big hoo-ha. And it's an absolutely delightful experience, and it's enlightening and healing and all of that. And it's not necessarily great for driving your car, or doing your job. So it's an access state, not necessarily a fully functioning state. But it's nice to know how to go there and then come back down into more of that equilibrium range and spend more time in the excitement and enthusiasm. And everyone that I've ever met, including all the masters, swamis, yogis, gurus that I've met, they all go here sometimes. It's just part of the human game, because this tends to be the dynamic at your learning edge. So what I've noticed is the more masterful you get with this, the more rapidly and efficiently you can learn, and then keep spending more time in this. The baseline goes up even though the wave keeps going. So one of the things I want you to notice here, and that I began to notice in retrospect, is that there is a 4-level, 7-stage process that's going on here that I'll be talking about more as we go along. So, jumping ahead about another 10 years, when this was starting to make sense to me and work to some satisfactory degree in my own life, I became more and more intrigued about the mind. And I became involved in brainwave biofeedback. And to make a long story short there, in order to be successful in controlling your brainwaves, in learning to access the states that you want to be in voluntarily, you first of all need to learn to relax the body. And then you need to learn to clear the emotions. Then you begin to get access to this. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, your brain works kind of like an old stick shift car, well, a new stick shift car, a finely tuned stick shift car. And the initial level is, for most people, asleep and not dreaming. And that's 0 to 4 cycles per second. And then as you come out of sleep, or as you go in from deep meditation, go into theta, between 4 and 8 cycles per second. That tends to be a very deeply meditative state, a very deeply healing state, a highly intuitive state. Very difficult for most people to access who've not done a lot of self-hypnosis or meditation or spiritual work of some sort, really calming work. Because for most people, you get that slow and you just go to sleep because that's your habit. Up above that is the alpha state, 8 to 13 cycles per second. We're going up and through the gears here. This is third gear. And that's tends to be a very creative, attentive, but relaxed state. If you're fully attentive, but you're not pushing on the world, you're not pushing on your thoughts, that will tend to be in the alpha range. And then when you really start getting kind of type A and under stress and pushing what you're doing, then that's 13 cycles and above in beta. So basically what you're doing is cycling through this same thing, this 4-level, and as you go in and out of it, 7-stage process. And the more you practice, the more you can use the gears that actually work best for whatever task you're wanting to do. For a number of years, I taught. I was a peak performance sports trainer, and the most effective model that I use, I'm just go over this very quickly, is this same sort of model where people were in touch with their purpose. They were pulled to play a sport. They would decide to get good at it, and they'd get the equipment, and they'd get a coach, and they'd train themselves. They'd get their body coordinated, learn all the techniques, and they could get very good. I worked a lot with professional athletes, and they would get very good and basically pretty much unconscious about what they were doing until they started to burn out, or they started to fail or get uptight or something like that. And then they would come to me, and we would start working on the conscious side of this arc, where you go back through these same phases, but this time you're doing it intentionally. You take all of that highly trained body, and this time the concepts come first. You create your visualization, your mental training, and the more clearly you can create the structure for fulfillment of your mind, then the emotion can pour through without knocking you off balance. And when that comes through more and more powerfully, ultimately you get into that state of flow, or the zone that everybody, any athlete, any person doing any kind of activity longs for and loves when it's there, and has a tendency to think, well, it happens on a good day or a bad day, or I got lucky. But this sort of process can begin to give you more voluntary access to it. And then finally, in my own quest, I worked for years as a communication conflict resolution trainer. And I noticed the same pattern here, that in the process of communication, what we're doing is we've all got the potential for this thing we call communication. Then some sort of feeling occurs. We get this charge, this emotion about it. We get an urge to communicate. Then we have a thought that it forms as a concept in our mind, and then we bring the feelings and thoughts together as an intentional impulse. And that's what creates language. That's what we use to send a communication to someone else. Now, when you're sending that communication, this begins to touch in kind of into quantum physics, where how do we send those communications? I want to suggest to you that even on the subtlest level, that all of this dynamic is the torus. And the torus is a rotation this way and a rotation that way. And there's an enfolding and unfolding that goes on as a torus would move through space like this. I love toys. Here's a Hollywood special effects machine that they've just come out with that demonstrates this nice. I don't know what's going to work best for the lighting, but oh, got a lot of wind right there.
You don't want to smoke.
Everybody see that? Okay. Yeah, let me get out of this breeze here.
With any good smoke.
You see that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, for a more tactile experience, this will not hurt. Nobody's ever been hurt with this. Let's see, how could you? I know. This does the same thing with the air. So it's sending a ball of air along, and if it were just a sphere of air, it would just dispel. It would pop like a bubble. But instead, it's riding on the air toroidally as it goes. So I think when we send an effective communication, sometimes somebody's communicating with you, and the words are coming out, and they're motivated, but it's just not happening. You just don't know what they're talking about. My sense is that their thought form is not a quantum yet. It's not a whole. And therefore, it can't be sent. As soon as someone's really clear on something, usually they can send it across if the other person has the genuine intention to receive it and then recreate it. And to me, in my 30-year quest in all of this research, the most powerful principle that I've come across is what I call recreation. And that's taking something the way it is and recreating it consciously. So if someone attacks me in Aikido, Instead of going up against it, I see what it is, and I recreate it. I turn and go exactly the same direction, match my body to them identically, and I recreate their point of view. And that's the blend. Then I can lead from there. If someone's doing body work on me and I'm really sore, if they push too hard, it's overstimulating and I kind of fight back and it doesn't work. But if I just allow myself to take my attention and go into the area where they're putting their energy, I recreate what it feels like exactly. In how big is it? What color is it? What does it feel like? If I recreate that with my consciousness, then the experience of the knottedness disappears. Just like the emotion. You recreate an emotion the way it is, it disappears. And, two electrons can't have the same spin and be in the same electron shell. At every level, there's this phenomenon of when something is recreated consciously, there's an annihilation that goes on. And what happens is the energy moves naturally to the next level. If you do work for someone and you present a report or something like that, and they say, wow, this is fantastic. Thanks for doing all this work. This is going to make a big difference in the job that I'm trying to do. If they recreate your intention in the work, you feel acknowledged. And wow, you want to do the next job. Whereas if they ignore it, if they don't recreate your effort through acknowledgement, you may do it 2 or 3 times, but pretty soon you want to work somewhere else and with someone else because you're not being recreated. If you recreate things the way they are, your consciousness and the situation naturally moves to the next level. It's my observation anyway. So when you get to the point of sending a thought, then that's when you create sentences as a carrier for your concept. And you send the sentence, and the communication itself, the meaning carries your motivation, your emotion, and then the completion is when it's recreated by someone else. So in the communication work, not only are you sending a wholeness to someone else and receiving theirs back, but in your energy field, if you're sitting down talking with someone and you're hostile with them, you'll notice that your energy field, if you're tuned into that kind of thing at all, you've separated your energy field, you've contracted it so that it doesn't really include them. And they've probably done the same thing. If, as you're communicating, you expand your toroidal energy field to include them, they'll know it instantly, and it'll feel safe, if it's a safe energy field that you're projecting. And the same thing the other way around. So this guy, Arthur Young, was the first one to identify this pattern, this 4-level, 7-stage pattern. And this shows how it's happened in the evolution of the universe. From the photon, just the energy potential, consciousness-bearing potential, light-bearing potential, coming into the first level of organization that we call, I don't believe they're particles, but what physicists call particles, then organizing an identity into atoms, and then finally the atoms combining into molecules. So this is basically done unconsciously. Then this arc, the other side of this 7-stage process, is when consciousness enters the process. And what molecules had to do at this 4th level was they had to do Aikido with ambient energy. They had to learn how to sustain temperature by regulating themselves in harmony with the energy that they were embedded in. And thank God, they somehow learned how to do that. And all the rest of life is built on top of that. And that's the same level, as far as I can tell, and a lot of the futurists and historians that I've been working with all kind of agree that that's where we are in human evolution. And this same arc it's a fractal system. So for each of these levels, there's a sub-level of 7 as well. And in the human level, this is pretty much where we are. We're in level 4, needing to learn how to master being in harmony with our bodies, with our breath, with our emotions, with our mind, with each other, with other countries, with our environment. And unless we do that, the experiment will go somewhere else or be postponed another few 100 million years. That's what we're doing. That's the story. And I don't know of any more important conversation for human beings to be having than how do we do that? So then molecules gain the power of growth, but not yet mobility. Plants stay in one place and just grow. And then animals have that same power, but they add mobility. and then humans add the power of full self-reflection. So this 4-level, 7-stage pattern, I'm not going to go into details of this, and I know it's overwhelming, but just to show you what Arthur Young has done in his meta-paradigm, cosmologically, is he's shown that these 7 levels, which we just had on the last one, have 7 sublevels, which he can demonstrate. Each one of these levels has a power that goes with it, and he can demonstrate at all these levels of our reality. So it's a very strong patterning. Yeah, it's called The Reflexive Universe, The Evolution of Consciousness by Arthur Young. Okay, I want to go now into a little bit of geometry. Now, some of you love geometry and some of you didn't. This is not the geometry that you didn't love. The geometry that we were taught is two-dimensional logic, basically. And you know, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, but it's a different level of relevance than what is nature's blueprint by which it has built us, by which it's building all of the community and beauty that the universe is coming up with. And let me show you one other thing first here. Yeah. Nature's counting. It's counting all the time. And not necessarily the same way we count. But it's a very simple, compelling counting system. And this is what nature seems to be doing. This is from Hans Jenny's Science of Kymatics, where he basically takes everything from powders to paste to liquids and illuminates them and vibrates them, and then photographs what happens as they change. And basically, this is a drop of water on a plate. And he vibrates it at a certain frequency, and then he increases the intensity, either through volume or through pitch. It'll work either way. It's just the actual intensity. And if you were, there are films of this. If you were looking at this, you would see that this is basically a triangular drop of water. Because when he starts to vibrate at the first level of intensity, where it moves from just a kind of a spheroid into this triangle, and if you were looking closely at this, you would see that the little water molecules are moving in a toroidal shape. They're moving from the center out to the outside and back, but they're doing it within a triangular constraint. So nature counts here, okay, there's a 3-ness. And then as you increase the intensity, it starts to shake and rattle and roll, and all of a sudden, at a certain frequency or volume, a certain quantum leap, it jumps to 4-ness. And these are 3 different phases of the 4-ness. And then you keep vibrating it, and guess what happens next? It jumps to 5-ness. These are 2 phases of the 5-ness. And guess what happens next? Right, it jumps to 6-ness. Now, after 6-ness, after Snickers, it basically starts breaking up into subfractal patterns. So basically, nature seems to be counting 3, 4, 5, 6, and then doing it all over again. Why is that? This is the simplest way that I've come to understand this. The tetrahedron, which is this 4-sided pyramid, with three sides and a bottom, is the simplest shape that has an inside and an outside in 3D reality. It is the fundamental building block of the universe, not the cube that physicists have been working with for the last 100 years. If you go out in nature, you won't see a whole lot of cubes. You'll see a few, but they're combinations of 2 of these. So if you were looking down the top of one of these, you would see 3 edges and 3 faces. If you were a figure skater and you were just a, kind of an invisible spin axis. You started to spin. As the energy increased, your arms would start to go out, and the first place that they would click in at, if you were nature building, is threeness. You see, it's the narrowest of all these shapes. So that's threeness. Then if you keep spinning faster and faster, then it clicks into fourness. This shape here, if you were looking at one of the points, 4 edges and 4 sides. If you look down at that, 4 edges and 4 sides. Okay? Then if you continued to spin faster and faster, you'd come to this shape. Look down on one of these points, 5 edges, 5 sides. All of these triangles are 60-degree angles. So when you jump to 6, when you get to 5ness to 6ness, you jump to 6, now you've got 6 60-degree angles, 360 degrees. You've got a full circle. And that creates a plane to infinity. You put 6 triangles together, and now you've got an infinite plane. It doesn't enclose anything. It's a concept of a plane to infinity. And then on the other side, it starts closing down from that. If you started opening this angle like this, you come to the plane of infinity, then you start closing up on the other side. And this is basically the dynamic of the torus. So when you get to this plane to infinity, it's a very interesting shape. And in my quest for the fundamental energy pattern of the universe, I've come to the conclusion that this is the fundamental flow pattern. But then, as these start to complexify, as these start to gather in groups, how are they going to do that? Nature always builds most efficiently. We don't, but nature does. And nature's gradually teaching us to do the same. And so, if you picture this as a sphere, rather than a torus, just for the sake of simplicity, yeah, I see that, and I think that I'm plugged in here. Yeah, everything's lit all the way around. Yeah. Well, the battery got low because I was running it only on the battery. Let's hope that's all it is. Okay. Okay, so if you picture this as a sphere, and that's really what energy doesn't come in building blocks. Energy seems to radiate out from centers and contract in towards centers. So if a center is radiating out, then it's going to meet the radiation from other centers radiating out. So it's useful to look and see if this were a sphere and it's going to meet other spheres around it, what's that going to look like? If they're all identical, it's going to look like this. There's going to be one sphere in the middle, and exactly 12 of the same size spheres fit around the outside. Then when you connect the centers of the spheres, now this is the essence of this geometry. This is not a thing geometry. This is not a physical geometry. This is an energetic geometry. So this is like the geometry between us and the moon. There's a straight line energy vector between us and the moon that you can't see. There's an energy vector between the centers of these systems. Vortexes attract each other from their centers. So if you draw lines connecting the centers of all of these energy vortexes, you get this. And Buckminster Fuller was the first one to recognize, as far as I can tell, the significance of this, and he called it the vector equilibrium. A vector is just an arrow that indicates a direction and the size of a force. So each one of these is indicating a size of a force, and they're all the same. since all the spheres are equidistant from each other. And it runs from one center to the next. So he called this the vector equilibrium because all of its vectors are in equilibrium. They're all the same. This is the only geometry that could be called the vector equilibrium. Everything else is out of balance. This one is totally in balance because if you went from the center out to all of these points, they would be the same length also. And Einstein was looking for the structure of the vacuum. And I think the reason he didn't find it was because there isn't a vacuum, first of all. It's a plenum, and that's really become realized since his time. And secondly, my team thinks that what he should have been looking for was the structure of equilibrium of the plenum. And I want to suggest, as Bucky did, that this is it. This is the structure of equilibrium. And the interesting thing about this is, first of all, it's planes to infinity. And secondly, you'll never see this in nature. All of the expansion and contractions from this you'll see as the different crystal forms. But you don't see this because it's in equilibrium, and nature's not in equilibrium. At least the physical world is not in equilibrium. It's a contraction or an expansion out of equilibrium, just like the waves in the sea. The reason you see the waves in the sea is they're expanding or contracting from this conceptual flat surface of the sea. You'll never see the ocean as flat because there's always some energy. This is, they're talking all about this quantum foam and everything. It's just like the ocean. You'll never see the ocean completely still because there's energy moving. So, and yet every water molecule near the surface is always being pulled toward this conceptual flat surface. In fact, it's not really even a flat surface because you pull back a ways and you see that it's on a planet. It's actually a round surface. But you get up close and it looks like it should be flat. So the fluctuations from this metaphysical equilibrium, I'm suggesting, is what we call the material world. So if this is the vector equilibrium, what happens if you compress the equilibrium? What happens if you have a local compression? Well, what happens is it begins to squeeze in, and for one thing, out of this geometry and a straight line push, you begin to get this nice spiral vortex. And then along the way, what happens is it goes in and it would contract, and if you had a vector between here and here, when it got to be the same length as all the others, right about there, it would be this. This is called the icosahedron because it's got 20 sides. Okay, so you compress from the vector equilibrium to the icosahedron, then you keep going, and it moves into the octahedron. Remember the fourness? So this was fiveness, now we're counting down to fourness, and then as it spirals, this one keeps going in and creates the tetrahedron, the basic unit volume in the universe. And regardless of scale, this is the shape, the fundamental shape from which all the rest of the physical reality is built, because it's the basic one that has rigidity. Okay, and you can see all these vectors are piled up there. It's got all this energy that wants to release, so it bounces back out again, just like this is basically a way of describing the cosmic breath. And notice that in the process of going through a breath, it goes 1, 2, and then it goes into 3. Then it would actually go into an invisible point into the singularity at the center, and then expand out the same way. And so basically you get a 4-level, because you've got the same shapes on either side of the expansion and contraction, and a 7-stage process. So I think this is a radial geometric description of what we saw going on at all these different levels of physical reality, including in communication, in sports training, in brainwaves, in your emotions. All these names that we give to this fundamental expansion and contraction that's going on in the universe. One more model of the torus, this seems to stick with people nicely, is why this torus? Well, if you've got complete equilibrium, nothing's going on, and therefore we don't know it. But as soon as something occurs in the universe, now you have a difference. You have between something that is higher pressure and lower pressure, something that's hotter and colder, something that's darker and light, whatever you want to call it. As soon as you have any differential, you've got these contrasts. And basically that's what weather patterns are. You get a high pressure and it's being sucked into the low pressure. So if you've got a high pressure water and a low pressure air, and you put them up against each other, you get kind of a conflict. And sometimes you'll get kind of a glug, you'll get an alternating current. But in order to have a continuous current, what this system has to do is somehow get enough energy going that it creates a spiral vortex. And then the high pressure and the low pressure, the water and the air, can pass by each other very beautifully and very harmoniously. And guess what? If you continue this around, this is just the center of the toroidal vortex. So this seems to be what's going on everywhere as differentials look to reconcile to equilibrium. Okay, so where does that bring us? This crop circle came through in 1998. Has anybody seen this one before? If you've known Nassim, you've probably seen this one. There's a psychic called Bashar, who's supposedly a very good psychic. And when this one came through, he said, this channel said, this is the most important crop circle to date, if only we could figure out what it is. Can you tell what that might be? Yeah, see the triangle, the squares alternating? Here's the triangle, squares around it. You've got this nucleus in the center with another sphere and then the outside sphere. They're showing us not only the torus, they're showing us the vector equilibrium. They're showing us the flow dynamic and the structure of the universe. I don't know for sure. I've heard lots of different reports. I don't know firsthand, so I can't say. To me, clearly someone who understands how energy works better than we do, and seems to, for some reason, not just blurt it out. They don't seem to be able to do it for us, but they seem to be able to give us hints. It's kind of like if you're, on the jungle gym with your 2-year-old. You don't want them to fall, but in order to actually climb, they've actually got to do it themselves. So you kind of stand around, make sure things are not too disastrous, but they've got to learn themselves. And I think that's what's going on. What in the world message would they have to give us other than how energy works so that we can better be in harmony with it and have a chance to survive and not screw up this whole corner of the cosmos for them as well? Okay, so I got very excited about, after this long quest, to get it down to 2 patterns was really exciting for me. So I was thinking of gathering some scientists, since I'm not an expert in chemistry, biology, physics, whatever, getting some real experts together and seeing, first of all, what they were looking at as fundamental, and secondly, what they thought of, what I thought of as fundamental, and some people like Bucky Fuller and Arthur Young and others. So I was sort of had that in the back of my mind, and then I came across this poster in the back of one of Bucky's books. And down in the little tiny print under this one, this is basically a single picture in 2D. It's a 3D representation of this whole pulsing octave, of this 4-level, 7-stage process. And he calls it the cosmic hierarchy, or the cosmic octave hierarchy. So in the caption of this, I saw that he said, this may come to be identified as the unified field. And I thought, okay, that's it. If he thinks so also. So I along with a couple of other people, I created a think tank back in 1997 and started gathering scientists. And Nassim was one of the first ones. Basically to check out, is this useful? Is this what physicists are missing from unified field theory? Einstein said the solution, if we found one, would be geometric. And hardly any physicists are trained in anything but the rudiments of geometry. And few of them have studied synergetic geometry. So, to make a long story short, we met for 3 years. And during the course of those 3 years, we basically verified the fundamental nature of the torus and the vector equilibrium at every visible level. So the physicist, the chemist, the biologist, the astronomers, astrophysicists, they all realized how these two patterns are fundamental in their particular discipline. And then the icing on the cake was a team of Italian astronomers had been working for 10 years analyzing the geometry of what they call the Great Wall, which is a vast collection of galactic clusters. That's about as big as we can think in terms of shape. So they were basically looking to see, is it random or is there any type of geometric structure to the way galaxies are floating there in space. And sure enough, they found that it was not random, that the galaxies were gathering at the corners of these octahedrons in what they called the egg carton universe. What Bucky Fuller calls the isotropic vector matrix, and what our team thinks is when you take one of these as a single cell and then just spread it out to infinity, repeated ones of these, it's a matrix now, and it's called the isotropic because still everything is the same in every direction. So this expanded out to a field seems to be what deep space is, what everything is. And so here's a still from one of our animations of the field showing exactly the same type of structure. It's this. This was a little sculpture designed by Bucky Fuller. This is the octahedron. This, you'll recognize now, expands out to the vector equilibrium. So basically what the universe is doing is closing and opening. It's a digital system. Open, close, open, close. And so what happens is, just as you throw a pebble in a pond and you get these ripples going out, that's essentially a kind of a representation of a 2D wave. Well, what would a 3D wave be? If energy was going out all around, what would that look like? And if it were going out, then how could any energy get in at the same time? Well, it turns out that each one of these 8 sides creates a vortex that expands out, and so that's energy moving out at the same time that energy is moving in the gaps. And then that closes down, and each one next to it, as one closes down, all the ones neighboring open up. So in the same way that the water isn't actually moving when you drop a pebble in a pond, basically the molecules are going up and down or in little circles. But the wave is passing through the water. It's being shunted from one molecule to the next. This is what happens in space, is that this matrix, a pulse comes through the space, and the energy closes and opens as it's going along. Each cell of space is staying in the same place in a sense. But as the geometry opens and closes, it passes the energy along. That's what we were shooting before is one of these waves passing through that field.
So the universe is not expanding?
It's expanding, it's also contracting.
So that's what the expansion is within this paradigm?
Well, it's a deeper question. It depends on how you define your universe. If your universe is cubic and red, then the universe is expanding. But every dynamic has its dual. There's a male for every female, up for every down, in for every out. So physics is studying radiation. That's what they've been doing since they started physics. They've completely ignored what Walter Russell called the genero-active force. That's why we think we're in a universe that's winding down. That we're in an entropic universe, and therefore it's going to be done soon. There's not enough to go around, and hence all the kind of policies that you see being enacted in the government. But if you realize that you're in a universe which is expanding and contracting in balance simultaneously, infinitely, a whole different set of policies comes out of that. Okay, so now through this lens, I want to begin to dive into the invisible world. As I said, the first 3 years of our think tank, the Sequoia Symposium, we basically validated these two patterns as fundamental. And during the process of that, we began to see how the two patterns fit together into one. So basically, we sat down at that time and said, okay, that's really exciting. So what? And basically decided to break up into two smaller collaborating groups. And Nassim continued with with writing the physics and creating the technology that some of you have heard him talk about. He's creating a whole alternative energy technology based on this theory, and we've already finished the first prototype, and it's doing non-traditionally explainable things. And it's just getting warmed up. And what I did was head up something called the Atomic Geometry Project to see if we could look through this lens at that passageway in geometry where spirit manifests into matter through 92 specific patterns. And physics has done an incredible job of collecting reliable data on those patterns. It's just done, I think, a pretty poor job so far of explaining what those patterns are, or showing what the patterns are. So I decided, what the heck? Well, let's see if we can do that. So I went to Trevor and his sister and said, give me your chemistry books. I've avoided it long enough. It's time that I get acquainted with chemistry. And it was really, talk about beginner's mind. I didn't have a clue about chemistry. So I started looking at the periodic table, but through this lens. And I was really encouraged as I started researching to see that Lloyd de Broglie, who's one of the most famous atomic scientists, said, while electrons were useful to understand many other things, we never really understood the electron itself. I thought, oh, okay, that opens up a little space. And Einstein said, it would be sufficient to understand the electron. So I thought, okay, fine, we're going in. So I don't have the time to go through this in detail, but I decided before I went in to try to establish what I believed and make a clear list of the criteria that I was using to see if I could model the atom in a more effective way. And I'll just point out a few of these, most of which don't agree with traditional physics, but they include and extend it, we think. Number one, the universe is a continuous, alive, and infinite medium. All multiplication, all creation of things happens by division of the wholeness. The simplest distinction creating a self-sustaining entity as motion in and of the medium is toroidal. We've already gone over that. So what we're suggesting is that matter is simply motion in the medium. So if you're going to have sustainable matter, it needs to be in a sustainable form, which is toroidal. All systems are connected, and all centers are one. And this is what begins to allow for a geometric explanation of these non-local experiments in physics and remote viewing and a lot of the spiritual experiences that people have that can't be explained by a relativistic speed of light type of paradigm. So we're saying that the centers of every system, any sustainable system needs to be centered by stillness. Again, physics has studied the rotation, that's electromagnetism, but they've completely ignored the stillness at the center. In fact, it pisses them off because when they calculate the energy at the center of one of these vortexes, it gives them infinity. And so they figure that must be wrong. They call it nasty infinity and gave somebody a Nobel Prize for assigning an arbitrary value to it. They called it renormalization. So renormalization is coming to a neighborhood near you soon. So if you allow it to be infinite, then all of a sudden the whole picture starts to fit together. Another couple of examples. Within the infinite is the finite, and within the finite is the infinite. So you can have a finite torus with infinity at the center. The curvature goes to infinity. So when we say all centers are connected, most people can get that. It's another stretch to go to actually all centers are one. Any organic system, if I cut my hand off, you're going to see a hollow in each of the bones. In an electrical circuit, there's a hollow in the middle. You cut a branch on a tree and there's a hollow. It seems like all of the growth of the material world is connected by this hollowness at the center. If you take a seed and it grows into an oak tree, you can follow the hollow from that hollowness at the center of the seed all the way up through the center of the tree and out the branch to the twig, to the leaf, to the vein. It's the center of all these fractal systems is infinite hollowness. And so what we're saying is that not only are those centers connected, they are one. It's the conveyor of consciousness. Infinite and hollow metaphysical. So centering every system in the material world is infinite unified consciousness. Quick question in the back?
Can't hear you.
Yeah, yeah. And we traditionally we call it a void. I would say it's an infinite fullness, and yet it's still. There is the stillness of equilibrium at these various levels, and that's what I'm going to go into. Is exactly what you just described. Is how the elements come out of that void. So these were some of my guideposts as I was going. I needed a good reason to change any of these beliefs, and with these beliefs, I was going to start structuring atoms to see, and then see if it fit the data from the physical universe. What was most useful to me was this particular periodic table, which shows some of the symmetries. The first row of the periodic table is just hydrogen and helium. So that's your basic kind of bookends. It's your male, female there. Then it jumps to a symmetry. There's a row of 8, and then a repetition of that. Then a row of 18 and a repetition. Then a row of 32 and a repetition. So I've been obsessed for 20 years with octaves. And one of the reasons I started with this for the invisible world is that the periodic table is an octave of octaves, just like our 4-level, 7-stage thing. And so I thought, that's a pretty good sign. So I thought, okay, the place to start logically would be hydrogen, because if that's the most fundamental element, then let's see, what would I guess that hydrogen would be, shape-wise? Well, a tetrahedron maybe has a structure, but what about as a flow? If matter is motion in the medium, what kind of flow would it be? Yeah, I thought, hey, maybe this is hydrogen. So then I started reading quantum physics, and this was from Nick Herbert's Quantum Reality. He said, sure enough, when they do the equations for what they call the proxy waves, the probability of finding an electron, guess what? It comes out for hydrogen as a torus. And then they excite it with more energy. It gets to be a bigger torus, and then it divides into 2 and becomes a double torus. So I thought, cool, so far so good. So this is in a sense our model. And what I guessed was that if this is hydrogen, 1 proton, 1 electron, then helium is 2 protons, 2 electrons. It's a doubling of that. Well, if one of my predictions is that every torus is going to have its mate, then helium? So if the double torus is actually the basic unit, which Nassim and I are both suggesting that it is, because it turns out, I'm not going to go in depth in this, but as a torus rotates, as a sphere rotates, it becomes a torus. It goes hollow in the middle. And then because the poles are narrower than the equator, you have this Coriolis effect, where the equator is bigger, so it has to rotate faster to get around in the same length of time than the poles. So you get this spinning motion that makes the water go down your drain in a different direction in the northern and southern hemispheres. So it's not just a simple sphere or torus. You've got this different spirals going on and kind of an equator in the middle where that energy dynamic separates out. We're not going there yet. Okay, so I hear you. Yep, that's not it. Okay, so now we're going to start moving things a little. So I'm suggesting that this is the basic toroidal motion. Again, don't let yourself get caught thinking a torus is a thing. It's just motion in medium. It's a whirlpool and a creek. And so if this is the fundamental nature of the movement of the torus, then if you actually put in the equator and the Coriolis effect, so we're suggesting that this is we call this the fundamental unit element. And I think that's what's going on in the electromagnetic field of our body, in a galaxy, in a hydrogen atom, a bigger version for a helium atom. Well, yeah, in fact, if you turn this on the end, I'm not going to hunt up that animation right now, but if you turn it on the end, it makes the perfect yin-yang, and you have the 4 spiral arms of a galaxy as well. So if this is the fundamental unit element, and we saw back in here that the first shape was a fundamental unit element and a doubling. Then we got to jump to this 8. So what's that? Well, okay, if the torus is the basic flow, and if this is the basic structure, now remember that there are 8 triangles here. It's these octahedral faces expanding out in their toroidal spirals. Well, then maybe the 8 is vortexes coming out from the center in this particular pattern, fitting into this invisible structure of space. Something like this. So these 8 circles in here are the 8 triangles here. So remember, in this model here, the energy is, the whole universe is breathing, and it's always balanced in and out. So as energy is moving out, energy is also moving in. So in the periodic table, one of the key clues is that the last element in each row is called the inert elements or the noble gases, and they've all got certain personalities that remain in its row all the way through. The one at the end of the row is called the inert gases because they don't combine with anything, at least not without a lot of effort. They're very happy on their own. They're stable, they're sustainable. And so I thought, well, then that's probably a filling out of the vector equilibrium. It probably has its equilibrium. It turns out that no matter how heavy these elements get, when they complete a row, the outer shell is always 8 electrons. So we're suggesting that an electron is simply a toroidal vortex. It's a standing wave, just like a wave in the rapids in white water. It's a standing wave at a certain radius from this singularity, this nucleus at the center of the system, where the out wave is balanced by the in wave in such a way that it creates a toroidal vortex. Okay? Now, a neat thing about this is that if you've got a toroidal vortex, if you've got a charge spinning around, and this spins around at light speed, it creates a magnetic field around it. And such that if you've got 2 of them, and they're both faced in the appropriate ways, north, south, if they attract each other like this, so it'll be south down here and north here, they'll attract each other. As you peel it off, they'll still attract each other. They'll be bound like this. And then they can roll on each other like gears. So what we're suggesting is that that's what nature is doing. It's creating out of these vortexes standing waves that cohere by magnetism. They cohere because the direction of their spin has to fit with the ones next to them. Okay? So if we do that, then now we've got to go from 2 to 8. So I had a friend of mine build me this little model. And we've taken these wheels and we've put magnets in them. We've put magnets in them and then alternated the north-south. So this would be a north and it would be surrounded by 3 souths touching it. And there's another magnet in here. So none of these wheels are touching each other. But by magnetism, they'll all turn like a gear mechanism. So we're guessing that's what the 8 is. That's a neon atom, so to speak. So now what's the second 8? Our suggestion is that by this rule of whenever you have a male, you have to have a female to balance out the universe. Okay, now each one of these is balanced with one on the outside, but as it starts getting bigger, then it wants one in its neighborhood that balances it. So each one of these gets its opposite at the appropriate distance outside of it, and that would be the second row. We think that's why these double, because you innovate and then you integrate, and then you innovate again and then you integrate. So when you got out to the next shell beyond this, we think since it's also 8 that it would be an identical shape, just a larger shell. So here would be an argon atom, the next inert element. Now this one we're giving you a little fly-in also. This would be spinning around the same way. So can you see that there are 2 layers? You've got the outer blue ones and the inner purple ones. Same shape, same dynamic. And this is what happens in the shell of electrons. It builds out to 8, and then the next shell is the opposite polarity outside that, and then it switches plus minus as it goes out. So then the question is, as we're going out to these next numbers, now we've got to get out to 18 and to do a double, and then this 32. Well, it turns out that these numbers, 2, 8, 10, 18, 14, 32, are exactly the numbers and the only numbers which work as the gear mechanism and satisfy all these criteria. So we got this quite quickly. It took us about another year to figure out what that is, and once we saw it, it was so obvious. Basically, the 8 is this shape here, and as you get out to the next levels, what's happening is you're seeing the geometries as they go through this same sequence that I showed you before, of the tetrahedron and then the cube and the octahedron and then the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. In the same way that the cube and the octahedron are duals, the icosahedron and there's another form called the dodecahedron, which is its dual, and it turns out that that's what the next ones are. So I'm just going to skim through this real quickly because we're running out of time, and I wanted to show you some of the applications of this.
I have a question. Some of us are not getting it.
Okay.
We were just looking at it, the chemistry chart.
Yes.
And what you were showing was atoms and their relationship, or are you actually showing electrons?
These are I'm glad you said that. Yeah, these are the number of electrons in the outer electron shells. Actually, in all the electron shells. I thought we were going to have to do another whole project with the nucleus, but it turns out that the nucleus is the same geometries in the protons, except the proton shell's complete halfway through the electron shell. So it turns out it looks like the protons are simply the other end of a vortex that is opening and closing like this, because the geometries match exactly, except they're halfway out of phase. So that seems to be a fit too. So I'm not going to take you through many more technical terms, but just look at the addition. Here we've got a nucleus. This is representing the helium atom. And then as these shells complete, these are the sorts of geometries that you're seeing get added. What happens is, as each outer shell gets added, it adds more pressure to the inner shells and makes them divide up into smaller toruses. More toruses to a shell.
Each one of these are different elements then.
Yeah. Or a couple of pictures of the same element. And so when you get out to this green is the green and the subsequent yellow is the 32 layer. And the 32 layer, we finally figured out, if you connect the centers of the toruses, it's just the dual of the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. So, there's no quiz on this. The whole point is that nature's just counting 3, 4, 5, 6, even at the subatomic or the atomic and subatomic level. And it's the same way, our bodies are shaped of this. A lot of people report that these, particularly the animations, feel very familiar to them. It's because it's who we are. So just to jump all the way to the end of this. So not all of the outer electrons fill. Because it gets too unstable. This would be the last one. This is uranium. So each one of these is a torus, but each one of these is a representation of the balance between the in wave and the out wave in all of these vortices. So if you picture, it's just continuous space. It just breaks up into the basic torus and then starts multiplying according to the most efficient natural principles and lays out the periodic table of elements. Always each electron, each proton, is simply a vortex centered by this infinity and infinite consciousness. Okay. So the implications of that are just beginning to be imagined. I think particularly for vibrational medicine. I've been talking to some people who are heavily involved in that, and for them to literally know the shapes of these atoms. They know a lot about the frequencies, and they're already working with them in healing, but to really know the shapes and begin to build the technologies according to those shapes. The reason Nassim is being so successful with his energy technology is he's mimicked this fundamental pattern exactly. So he just puts it into resonance with the ambient geometry that we live in, and it loves it. So it just goes. You unplug it and it just keeps going. Very quickly, I could spend a day, Nassim could spend 3 days talking about the connections with ancient cultures. We're not the first people to see this. Initiates have been seeing this as we're not just inventing anything. We're making some devices, but we're simply unveiling the patterns of which we're made. Any of you familiar with the Meru Project and Stan Tenen? I co-founded that. He'd been working on the research for a number of years, but we created a foundation together back in the early 80s because he'd had a vision about the Hebrew alphabet. And to condense 15 years into 15 seconds, we used to sit around with strips of lead, and his vision was that the Hebrew alphabet was shadowgrams, not pictograms, tonograms. So we'd take strips of lead and we'd put it into these shapes, and we'd shine a flashlight on the wall until we'd get the Aleph, letter A. And then we'd turn it and we'd try to get and we had several different shapes that would get some letters. We finally got one shape that gives you all 22 letters. And this is the shape. I should have brought one with me because it's beautiful. It fits right over your hand. And how Stan thinks they did it was basically sitting around in the cave with a fire, making shadowgrams with their own means of self-expression. And so it's this beautiful shape which fits exactly on a torus. If you start at the seed center of a torus and turn out in a spiral around to the equator, that's exactly the shape that fits over your hand and makes all of the letters. Anything after that is repetition. So it's a code. It goes one step further, and I don't usually show this, but for this audience, I'll say the first sentence of the first chapter of the book of Genesis lays out in absolute many layers deep of error-correcting code the vector equilibrium as well as a spiral pattern, and it's to a level where these little tugging crownlets that people haven't understood, or at least don't talk publicly about, the legend is if you change a jot or a tittle of the Hebrew alphabet, the universe will fall apart. Well, I think this is what they meant, that it was a code that encoded the most esoteric knowledge of the fundamental patterning of which we're made.
Who wrote that?
What's that?
Who wrote that book?
The hollow at the center. Yeah. Can I use that from now on? So take out Nassim's film, and he'll show you on there, I assume, how it's also encoded into the Mayan calendar, into the... Yeah. It's encoded into the I Ching, into the Kabbalistic tree of life. Again and again, they were encoding this so that the information wouldn't be lost. And there's substantial evidence in a lot of different histories that this information was brought by ETs. And several people that I know who are contactees who have been on ships, they all report, those who got to see the drive of the ship, they all report it's this particular toroidal vortex. So one of the things that they were showing is simply how nature works. Another thing that seems to be encoded in a bunch of the crop circles very specifically. That's another whole story. But basically they're encoding how to build and run a ship as well. And another, not just how to make a mechanical thing, but how to blend with the time-space continuum in such a way that you could actually do that kind of travel. You could travel interplanetary, intergalactic, in a lifetime, in an instant. What's that?
Have we figured it out? Is that coming along?
I'd say it's coming. I haven't seen anyone who's got it entirely, but keep track of Nassim. Okay. And for those of you who haven't seen, I'll just show you two slides. I'm more the skeptic when Nassim and I are working together. I'm very open to what he has to share. I just want to keep trying to ground it in some proof. So when he ignited his invention, this resonator, which I can't talk about technically, but I can show you this, I asked him, well, what's it going to do? He said, well, besides creating its own miniature black hole, it's going to amplify the life force in its field. And several psychics had verified that this would happen. And sure enough, when he finished the first one, so I said, okay, well, let's test it with some plants. And so we took plants and we took cuttings. We took buds, new blossoms off the same plant on the same day that were as identical as possible. And we put them in 4 different types of water. There was one of the water had been taken from a well and put in the environment of this, what he calls the resonator, for a number of hours or a couple of days. And then there was the same well water without, and then there was some regular tap water and some purified tap water. So they all started out the same on October 27th. You can see by November 6th they're still pretty much the same, and I'll jump right to the punchline of that. By November 23rd, this one's totally gone. This one's just about gone. That's about halfway gone. And this looks pretty much like the day it was put in the water. And this is the resonated water. So if any of you have seen those Japanese studies with the water, this is another indication of what happens when the crystal structure of water is actually pure the way it's supposed to be. So we did a couple of studies like this, and already it was enhancing the biofield about 30 to 40%. Because what it's doing is focusing the genero-active force, which is what makes a seed, what makes a fetus, what makes a galaxy. Okay, so I want to complete by just saying very as succinctly as I can what I'm making an effort to do about this. because I'm trying to take these same principles into daily life and into social change. The four most important things that I know to do and that I'm trying to do with my energy and resources and networking and so forth is to accomplish these four things. One is to define a unified science. And Nassim and I and a number of other scientists have been involved with a group that has been kind of rewriting the language of science in a unified way. And that's coming along. The second is an integral paradigm media outreach, to use the media to spread this kind of realization for anyone who's ready to resonate with it and enhance it and refine it and so forth. And I'm deeply involved in a project called MindCenter, which is doing that. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Thirdly is the resonance energy technology. And you probably know a number of people. There are a significant number of inventors who have caught on to basically the Aikido of technology. Technology basically so far has been, it's that good old macho male thing. Hey, let's make an explosion. Let's take two things, we'll crash it together, and maybe we can control it. And maybe not, but maybe we can. And for a while, we'll be more powerful than someone else. Clearly, we've taken that about as far as we can go. Just like with the positional martial arts. So the paradigm shift, and I think that we're being shown in lots of different ways, including crop circles, is figure out how nature does it, and then fit in with that, given that that's who we are, and create the power through resonance rather than through collision. So Nassim and a whole bunch of other inventors are accessing that resonance in some really significant ways, and we'll be seeing that in the next few years. Obviously, you're probably well aware that there are lots of forces that don't want to see oil replaced quickly. It'll happen anyway. The truth will prevail. And finally, an integral paradigm in public policy, which will be, I think, the last to come. But when enough people know and call for policies which are all-inclusive, which are whole-centered in their perspective, then those are the politicians who will get elected. So there's a whole outreach going on to refine that as well. In fact, one of the people doing it is Danny Sheehan, who I know has been up here developing the New Paradigm Institute. So the media outreach that I'm one of the principles in now is called MindCenter. We intend to create a media compass for sustainable evolution. So if we're in this voyage through space, on this spaceship Earth, let's get a compass that we can all look at and see how we're doing. So we're intending to create or to catalyze the media for that. Our purpose is to create and facilitate compelling media presentations which assist humanity in thriving through the evolutionary challenges which threaten our survival. So the first thing that we're doing is trying to create a single hologram, colloquially speaking, a single video, a single film, which will embed the essence of this awareness in a way that we could bury it in a time capsule. So if we don't make it, someone else someday might. But then we're going to go ahead and open the time capsule and broadcast it to the world right now. So we've decided right now that the most effective way that we know to do that is to gather the pioneer leaders from all over the planet, of all ages. And then have a intergenerational, international leadership summit for the survival of life on Earth, and film the whole thing, and create not only a film but a reality TV series out of it where we follow the process. So a year from exactly now, next July, in Santa Barbara, we've reserved a retreat center, and we've invited 18 of the top youth leaders from all 5 continents. And they will be there for 2.5 weeks in residence. And then we're bringing in the pioneers more from our generation, for some of you, or most of you, who have pioneered sustainability in all of what we've identified as the 12 primary sectors of human endeavor. And so one or more designers and implementers will be coming in from each of those sectors, and we've created a curriculum where basically the first week will be the inner journey. Body, emotion, mind, nonviolent communication, relationship, innate spirituality, beyond any particular religious belief system, but to to reveal the innate spirituality which is common to all of us, and then ultimately leading to an understanding of worldview. That it's worldview that leads to results. It leads to fights in relationship, it leads to wars, and different levels of worldview lead to different results. So this is an effort to familiarize people with the evolution of worldviewing and to invite people into a level of worldview that is integral, that actually includes all as one, and gives all of creation the same kind of rights. And then ultimately, in the second week, then we're bringing in people who can show how that integral worldview is being applied successfully already, though not fully integrated by any means, or we'd be living in a different world. But it's already been proven in every major area of human activity. So new scientists like Nassim and Mark Cummings was just mentioned, he'll be there, and a number of others. And then representatives from environment, from commerce, from governance, and finally from media and the arts. Barbara Marx Hubbard, who's coming up here this weekend to give a talk. If any of you don't know her and haven't seen her, go listen to her talk. That's where she's doing it?
Well, there's a conference at the Windmill Hill Inn this weekend with James White and Jose Rose, which is part of the Day at a Time.
Great.
It's $300 conference fee, and so we organized so these speakers would come out and talk to the public.
Great.
Places. I did not know she was going to be there, so I didn't organize it. To be out here.
Well, she's one of the great visionaries of our time. And we're working with her, and we found this quote in one of her books that's probably 15 years old, where she said, as we seek to facilitate a gentle birth, a graceful transition to the next stage of our evolution, we will discover a natural pattern, a design of our birth transition, and develop a plan to cooperate with this design. And that's what we feel is now happening. We've found the pattern, and so we've just got a couple more slides here to show you how we're taking this out as a whole through something called the Whole System Shift Project, which is being sourced through the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, and which Barbara Marx Hubbard founded. Basically, again, in relationship with the vector equilibrium and this 12 around 1 sphere packing, the 12 areas that we've identified that encompass all of the human endeavor also divide nicely into 3 realms of emphasis, where the greens are like the primary needs, the pinks are the systems, and the blues are the guidance, more of the spiritual and consciousness aspect. So we've identified all of those sectors and leaders in each of those sectors and developed a new form of communication that we call the vector equilibrium synergy process that creates communication amongst a triad that always includes one from the vital needs, one from the systems, and one from the guidance, so that you've always got those 3 elements represented for any crucial decision. And so communication can start amongst 3 of the most relevant sectors, but then it moves in the same pattern as this vector equilibrium torus. It moves across the whole system and back, so that in the future, any major decisions and policies will come out of consulting all sectors. Elected representatives, the wise leaders from all of the different sectors. So business decisions don't get made without consulting the spiritual aspect and the who? George. Oh, George. Not yet. If you have a connection, we'd be happy to use it. Oh. So remember this double torus around the Earth. That's what we're trying to do what we're intending to do with the media as well. Take this integral awareness through strategic philanthropy, through gathering these mentors and youth in the convocation, create a media production that goes out to viewers, and then interested viewers are sent to the evolve.org website as well as others, which is a terminal which gives access to integral resources at all different levels of human experience. So you can go for books, DVDs, teachers, schools, etc. So that you can follow up. When people get excited, they can follow up specifically in their area of interest. And then finally into community-based support, local educational centers. And as people then begin to integrate these principles into their lives, then the second torus comes in, which is once you've gotten it yourself, then you can't avoid somehow civically engaging, even if it's just in meditation for the good of all sentient beings. And then that begins to get manifested in people's areas of expertise, in science, technology, leadership, policies, economics, ecology, education, media, and then creating a measures and feedback system. Following this film that we're going to be making, we want to create a news program called Vital Signs or something like that, Critical Path, something like that, which basically people can tune in the beginning probably once a week, where humanity can tune in if they want to see how we're doing. So each of these 12 sectors will have kind of 3D holograms showing are we progressing or regressing in each of these areas. So it's literally biofeedback for the planet. And then compelling stories of both the crises that we're facing and sustainable solutions which are being designed and or implemented. So that's my quest in the universe.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.